Dawn crept slowly over the plains, dragging a gray light through the mist that hung above the cottonwoods. The town of Ridgeway lay still, save for the shuffle of boots along the boardwalk and the faint toll of the blacksmith's hammer far off. Folks said Sheriff Luke Harlan was already awake before the bell rang 6, same as every day, same as when his wife was alive. He'd built his life on duty and silence, iron habits that never rusted even when his heart did. That morning he rode in from the West Road with a prisoner tied to his saddle. The young man's head hung low, a torn sleeve and dirt-smeared face making him look half wild. Word spread quickly. By the time Luke reached Main Street, shutters creaked open and whispers rode the air. Ada Wynne was washing linens behind the boarding house when she heard the horses. The wringer slipped from her hands, water sloshing over the bucket. One glance was enough. The man tied behind the sheriff's horse was her brother, Tom. She ran for the street, skirts dragging mud. "Sheriff Harlan! What's the meaning of this?" Luke didn't slow. His expression was stone, gray eyes fixed ahead. "He's wanted for robbing the Wells Fargo coach. Witnesses saw him near the pass." "That's a lie." Ada's voice cracked. "He was home all night. I cooked him supper myself." The sheriff dismounted, unhooked the chain, and pulled Tom to his feet. "You can tell that to the judge when court's called. Till then he stays in my custody." Tom, barely 20 and trembling, lifted his head. "Ada, I didn't do it." "I swear." Luke's face didn't move, but his eyes shifted. Just a flicker, something unreadable. He led Tom through the gathering crowd. No one spoke for Ada. Ridgeway had long since learned to keep quiet around the law. That night the town buzzed with talk. Some said the boy had been seen near the coach trail days before. Others whispered it was a setup. But the sheriff's word carried weight heavier than any rumor. Ada spent the evening at the jailhouse door. Luke ignored her knocking until finally he stepped outside, hat in hand, lantern glow sharp against the lines of his jaw. "Miss Wynne," he said, voice even, "you'll do your brother no favor by shouting in the street." "I'm not shouting," she said, low and shaking. "I'm asking how you can call yourself a man of justice while you cage an innocent boy." He looked down the empty road before answering. "Justice isn't about who we love, Miss Wynne, it's about what we can prove." "Then prove it," she whispered. "Because I can." His gaze lingered a moment, hard and searching, then he turned back toward the cell. The door shut with a sound that felt final as thunder. Inside her room that night, Ada sat by the lamplight, staring at the small wooden cross her mother had left her. The wind rattled the window pane, and she prayed not for mercy but for strength. If the sheriff thought she'd break, he was wrong. She'd seen too much loss to let this be another. At dawn, she left the boarding house with a small pack and the single photograph she owned. Tom smiling beside their father before the war took him. She meant to find the truth herself, even if it meant walking straight into the lion's den. Out by the stable, Luke stood saddling his horse again. He looked up when she passed. Their eyes met briefly, hers blazing with defiance, his unreadable beneath the brim. For a moment something unspoken passed between them. Then he said quietly, "You'd best stay clear of this trail, Miss Wynne, it means ground." She didn't stop walking. "So am I, Sheriff." The morning sun broke through the clouds just then, painting the dirt street gold. It was the first bit of warmth Ridgeway had seen in weeks, but it promised fire more than comfort. Ada left town on foot, the chill of morning biting her fingers. The road leading west cut through sagebrush and dust, empty but for wagon ruts and the faint tracks of horses. Every mile she walked, she replayed her brother's face behind the bars, young, frightened, and still trying to smile for her sake. She knew Tom wasn't perfect. He'd run with rough company once, boys who gambled and drank more than they worked. But robbery, never. He didn't have that kind of darkness in him. By noon she reached the ridge where the stagecoach had been ambushed. Burned wood littered the ground, half buried in the dirt. She crouched beside the wreck, touching a charred piece of wheel rim. The air still carried a faint tang of smoke. A rider's shadow fell across her. Ada froze, hand tightening on her skirt. "You shouldn't be here," said a man's voice. It was Deputy Cole Ramsey, Luke's right hand, known for his easy smile and his silver revolver. "I came to see where it happened," Ada said, straightening. He tilted his hat. "The sheriff won't like you poking around. I don't care what he likes. My brother's in a cell because of this." Cole studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But spirit won't change the law." "I'm not trying to change the law," she said. "Just the truth." Something flickered in his eyes. Wariness, maybe guilt. He shifted in the saddle. "Best go on home. This ground's cursed." Then he wheeled his horse and rode off, leaving dust curling behind him. Ada knelt again, scanning the dirt. She found boot prints, 2 sets, deep and close. One matched Tom's worn soles. The other was heavier, the heel cut with a notch. That wasn't Tom's. She folded a scrap of torn cloth she found near the tracks, tucking it into her apron pocket. When she returned to town that evening, the air was thick with talk again. The saloon lanterns burned low, and the piano played something mournful. She walked past, keeping her head down until she reached the jailhouse. Luke sat inside, coat off, rolling a cigarette he didn't light. He looked up when Ada stepped in. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said. "I went to the pass," she replied. "There's more to this than you think," his brow furrowed. "You were told to stay away, and you were told the evidence doesn't lie," she shot back. "But sometimes men do." He set the cigarette aside and leaned forward on the desk. "You're saying someone framed him?" "I'm saying there's another pair of tracks, heavier, sharper, and a piece of cloth that doesn't belong to Tom. Your deputy was there today. Maybe ask him why." Luke's jaw tightened. "Cole?" Ada nodded. "He didn't seem surprised to see me." The room fell quiet except for the creak of the chair when Luke stood. He walked to the window, staring out at the lamplight spilling across the street. "Miss Wynne," he said slowly, "you don't know what you're stirring. I know my brother's life depends on it." He turned, eyes hard again, though his voice had softened. "If you're wrong, you'll destroy what little peace this town's got left. And if I'm right?" He didn't answer. Ada left the jail with her heart hammering, the sound of boots echoing behind her long after she'd gone. Somewhere deep down she knew the sheriff wasn't as sure of his own words as he pretended to be. Inside, Luke stared at the desk, at the badge gleaming in the lantern light. It felt heavier than usual, like it carried the weight of more than the law. Outside, thunder rolled far off beyond the ridge. The kind that promised rain. Or reckoning. The storm came at dawn, rolling over Ridgeway like a herd of wild cattle. Rain hammered the roofs, turning the streets into rivers of mud. Sheriff Luke Harlan stood under the porch eaves, coat dripping, watching the water rush through town. He hadn't slept. Cole Ramsey had been gone since before sunrise. The man hadn't reported back after his patrol, and Luke's gut told him that wasn't a chance. Inside the jail, Tom Wynne sat quietly in his cell, staring at the floorboards. When Luke brought him breakfast, the boy didn't touch it. "You planning to eat or just sit there till you fade?" Luke asked. Tom looked up, eyes red from a night without rest. "Doesn't matter, does it?" "You've already decided what I am." Luke set the plate down and sighed. "You think I like throwing boys in chains?" Tom said nothing. He turned his face away, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. When Luke stepped outside, Ada was already waiting by the hitching post, her shawl soaked, hair plastered to her cheek. "I told you to stay home," Luke said. "And I told you I wouldn't," she replied. "Your deputy's gone." "Why?" he frowned. "You've been asking questions again." "I've been listening," she said. "The blacksmith's wife saw Cole riding out last night with a pack horse." "That's not patrol work." Luke's jaw clenched. He looked toward the western trail. "If he's running, I'll find him. I'm coming with you." "No," he said sharply. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is. You took my brother. I'll take the risk." The sheriff hesitated. For the first time she saw weariness beneath his hard shell, like a man too long at war with his own duty. He gave a short nod. Then ride behind me. Don't speak unless I say. They rode out through the rain, hooves splashing mud. The land stretched wide and empty, the storm chasing them west. When they reached the ridge, the wind cut sharply, carrying the scent of pine and gunpowder. Luke dismounted near the burned coach site. Tracks crisscrossed the soaked earth, but one stood out, fresh, deep, leading toward the river canyon. He crouched beside them. "Same notch in the heel," he muttered. Ada dismounted too, clutching her shawl tight. "That's him, isn't it?" Luke looked up. "You were right." They followed the tracks to the old mill by the canyon rim, a ruin long abandoned since the floods. Smoke curled from the chimney. Luke drew his revolver and motioned for Ada to stay back. Inside, the smell of damp wood and whiskey filled the air. Cole sat at a table, half a bottle gone, pistol resting beside his hand. "I figured you'd come," Cole said without turning. "Didn't expect company, though." His eyes flicked toward Ada. "You brought her too, Sheriff?" Luke stepped closer. "You framed that boy, why?" Cole's grin faltered. "I owed money. Those outlaws from Silver Ridge, they wanted a scapegoat. Said they'd let me be if I gave him someone else to hang. You let a kid take the fall for your debt?" Luke's voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. Cole's hand twitched near his pistol. "Wasn't supposed to go this far." Ada stepped forward despite Luke's warning look. "You can still make it right. Tell the truth." Cole looked at her, and something like shame crossed his face. Then he grabbed the gun Luke fired first. The shot cracked through the storm, echoing across the canyon. Cole's weapon clattered to the floor, his shoulder torn, breath ragged. Ada covered her mouth, trembling. Luke lowered his revolver. "You'll stand trial. That's more mercy than you gave him." Cole laughed bitterly, slumping against the wall. "Mercy," he said. "You always were too soft for this badge, Luke." Rain poured through the roof holes, dripping down Luke's sleeve as he reached for the cuffs. Ada watched in silence, heart pounding. For the first time, she saw something human in the sheriff's eyes, pain, not pride, and it unsettled her more than his gun ever had. The rain eased by morning, leaving the land washed clean but heavy with silence. Sheriff Luke Harlan rode into Ridgeway with Cole Ramsey shackled to the saddle. The townsfolk stared as they passed. The deputy who once smiled at every passerby now sat pale and beaten, eyes empty as dust. Ada followed on horseback, her hands raw from the reins. She wanted to feel triumph, but all she felt was a low ache in her chest. The man who framed her brother was caught, yet the look on Luke's face said the fight wasn't over. At the jailhouse, Luke locked Cole in the far cell. Tom sat across from him, disbelief etched in his face. "That's him?" Tom asked quietly. Luke nodded. "He confessed to the robbery." Tom's breath caught. "Then I can go?" "Not yet," Luke said. "A confession's words. The court needs proof." Ada stepped forward, voice rising. "You have his word and the tracks, Sheriff. What more do you need?" Luke met her eyes, calm but stern. "Something that will hold before a judge. Cole's partners are still out there, and they'll swear he's lying to save his neck." Tom gripped the bars. "So I just rot in here while you wait for another man to speak?" Luke didn't answer. He walked to his desk and began writing a statement, his shoulders heavy with the weight of it all. That night, Ridgeway's saloon buzzed louder than ever. Folks argued whether the sheriff had turned on his own men. Some said he'd gone soft. Others whispered that the law was breaking apart. Ada sat alone in her room, staring at the small lamp flame. She thought of Luke, his steadiness, his silence, the way he'd risked his life to bring Cole back alive. For the first time, she saw that his coldness wasn't cruelty. It was armor. Outside, a knock rattled the window. She rose fast, heart jumping. Luke stood there, hat in hand, rain still clinging to his coat. "I shouldn't be here," he said softly. "Then why are you?" "Because Cole's partners will come for him. They won't leave him breathing long enough to speak." Ada's breath caught. "You mean tonight?" "Maybe. I'll need help watching the road. Someone who knows the shadows better than I do." She frowned. "Why me?" "You see things others don't," he said. And you don't scare easily. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ada nodded and reached for her shawl. Tell me where to look. They took posts outside the jailhouse, the wind cool and sharp. The moon hung thin above the clouds, painting the street silver. Hours passed in quiet. Luke leaned against the rail, eyes scanning the dark. Ada sat nearby, her hands clasped tight. You ever get tired of being the one everyone fears? She asked. He looked over, surprised. It's better than being the one everyone pities. She tilted her head. You sound like a man who's lost both. He didn't answer. The silence stretched until it broke. Hooves in the distance. Luke straightened. Riders 3, maybe 4. Ada's pulse raced. Shadows moved near the blacksmith shop, creeping toward the jailhouse. Luke drew his revolver, eyes narrowed. Stay behind the post. But Ada didn't. As one of the outlaws stepped into the lamplight, she threw a rock toward the saloon window, shattering glass. The crash drew their eyes just long enough for Luke to fire. Gunfire tore through the street. One outlaw fell. Another fired back, bullets sparking against the rail. Luke ducked, reloading fast. Ada crawled to the jail door, shouting, Tom, down! The fight ended as quickly as it began. 2 men fled into the hills. The third lay dead in the mud. Luke lowered his gun, breathing hard. The town stirred awake, doors opening, faces peering out. Ada stood shaking, rain and dust on her cheeks. Luke looked at her and said, You disobeyed me again. She met his gaze. And it saved your life. For the first time he smiled, a small, tired curve that almost looked human. The sheriff's badge gleamed under the moon. But Ada saw the truth now. It wasn't made of stone. It was made of weight. By morning, Ridgeway was no longer quiet. Smoke still lingered over the street where the gunfight had ended, and townsfolk gathered in tight clusters, whispering about the outlaws and the sheriff's lady helper. Ada didn't care what they said. Her only thought was Tom. She hurried to the jailhouse just as Luke stepped out, hat pulled low, his arm wrapped in a sling from a grazing bullet. You're hurt, she said. It's nothing, he replied. I've seen worse cuts from barbed wire. Then you've lived a hard life, she murmured. He gave a half smile. We all have, Miss Wynne. Inside, Tom was pacing. The noise outside made him restless. When Ada told him what had happened, that Luke had fought off Cole's partners, Tom's anger softened a little. So the sheriff saved me again, he said quietly. Guess I owe him thanks. Ada smiled faintly. You owe him the truth. Stay strong till this is over. That evening, word came that one outlaw had been caught near the canyon. Luke went to question him. Ada followed, unable to stay behind. The man was a thin, ragged rider with a broken wrist and hate in his eyes. Luke stood before him, calm and cold. You rode with Cole Ramsey, Luke said. Who planned the robbery? The man spat blood onto the floor. We all did. Ramsey said the coach would carry the army pay. Easy gold. And the boy you framed? Luke's voice was low but sharp. Did he know? He didn't even show up, the outlaw sneered. Ramsey gave us his name. Said the sheriff hated him enough to believe it. Ada's breath caught. Luke's face changed, something inside him cracked. Why his name? He asked. Because you'd never look at your own deputy, the man said with a grin. Ramsey said that badge blinded you. Luke stepped back. For the first time, Ada saw guilt flicker across his face. When they left the cell, Ada spoke softly. He told the truth, didn't he? Luke nodded, jaw tight. I wanted to believe my deputy was clean. That's my sin. Your sin was trusting the wrong man, she said gently. That's not the same as doing wrong. He looked at her for a long moment. It feels the same. They walked through town in silence. The sun was sinking and the air smelled of rain-soaked wood. People watched them pass. The sheriff and the woman who stood beside him, if she belonged there. That night, Luke went to the jail and unlocked Tom's cell. You're free, he said simply. Tom blinked. You mean it? Luke nodded. The judge will see the statements in the morning. You've done your time for another man's sin. Ada stepped forward, tears welling as she touched her brother's arm. "You're coming home." Tom looked at Luke. "Why'd you help me after what I said to you?" Luke met his gaze steadily. "Because you were right to hate me. But hate doesn't fix a thing." Tom swallowed hard. "Guess neither does pride." Luke gave a quiet nod. "Then we understand each other." When they stepped outside, the night was soft, stars shining through thin clouds. Ada turned to Luke. "You could have let this ruin him. Why didn't you?" He hesitated, then said, "Because when you looked at me that first day, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Someone who still believed a man could change." Ada's breath trembled. "And can he?" He looked out at the horizon. "If he's willing to bleed for it." A long silence stretched between them. Then Ada said, "The town won't forgive easily." "They don't have to," he replied. "I'm not asking them to." She studied him a moment longer. The sheriff who once seemed carved from stone now looked only human, tired, worn, but alive. When she left for home that night, Luke stayed on the porch watching her fade into the dark. The lamplight caught his badge one last time before he unpinned it. Staring at its shine, somewhere deep inside, the sound of thunder began again, far off, but coming closer. The next morning brought uneasy peace. The sky was clear for the first time in days, yet the town still felt heavy, like it was waiting for something to break. Sheriff Luke Harlan sat outside the jailhouse, polishing his revolver in silence. He hadn't slept. Cole Ramsey, wounded but alive, was being guarded inside until a marshal could arrive. The captured outlaw had been sent to the county prison. Tom Wynn was free, but Luke's mind couldn't rest. He'd upheld the law, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like standing over ashes after the fire's gone. Ada arrived carrying a loaf of bread and a tin of coffee. "You look worse than the outlaw, Sheriff," she said softly. He gave a tired half smile. "That bad?" "Worse." She set the food on the rail. "You haven't eaten, have you?" He didn't answer, but she poured the coffee anyway. They sat in silence, the morning wind tugging at her shawl. "You could leave," she said quietly. "Let the marshal handle Cole. Let Ridgeway sort itself out." Luke looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. "A sheriff doesn't walk away when things get ugly." "Maybe not," Ada said, "but a man can." He studied her, something flickering behind his steady eyes. "You sound like you want me gone." "I sound like someone who's tired of watching good men destroy themselves for pride." Her words cut clean. Luke looked away, jaw tight. Before he could reply, a shout came from down the street. Tom came running, dust flying behind him. "Sheriff! Someone set the mill on fire." Luke stood at once. "The old mill?" Tom nodded, breathless. "Yes, and there's smoke heading toward the canyon. If it catches the brush, it'll burn the whole ridge," Luke finished. They mounted their horses fast. Ada followed without a word. The wind carried smoke thick and sharp. By the time they reached the old mill, flames were eating through the roof, sparks leaping into the dry grass. Luke dismounted, grabbed a shovel, and began cutting a trench to slow the spread. Tom joined in, coughing hard from the smoke. Ada hauled buckets from the river, dousing the edges where she could, but the fire moved faster than any of them. The dry wind turned it wild, roaring through the grass toward the canyon ridge. "Fall back," Luke shouted. "It's too strong. No!" Ada yelled over the roar. "It'll reach the town." He turned and saw her stumble. A burning beam had fallen near the water trough, flames blocking her path. Without thinking, he ran through the smoke and pulled her clear, the fire licking close enough to sear his sleeve. They hit the ground hard. Ada coughed, choking on ash. "You're fine," he said, though his arm burned red and raw. "Just keep moving." Together they dragged the last bucket line to the edge of the trench. By evening the flames began to die. The ridge was blackened, the air thick with soot, but the town was safe. Luke stood staring at the smoldering remains, chest heaving. His shirt was torn, face streaked with ash. Ada walked up beside him, touching his arm gently. "You could have let me burn," she said. He looked at her, voice low. I don't let people burn. Not anymore. She understood then. Something in those words reached deeper than the fire. Tom approached, eyes wide. They said the fire started near the jailhouse, he said. Cole's cell. Luke's stomach dropped. You mean he's gone? Tom nodded. The door was busted clean open. The sheriff closed his eyes, the exhaustion turning to dread. He set the fire to cover his escape, Luke said. And now he's got a head start. Ada looked at him, fear mixing with resolve. Then we find him. He turned toward her, the glow of the dying fire reflecting in his eyes. We will, but this time, Miss Wynne, it won't be justice we're chasing. It'll be judgment. The wind carried the smell of smoke over the town, a warning that peace never lasts long in Ridgeway. By the next sunrise, the ashes from the ridge still smoked. Sheriff Luke Harlan stood by his horse, staring at the black horizon. Every trail west had been checked, but Cole Ramsey was nowhere to be found. Ada walked up behind him, a scarf tied over her hair against the cold wind. You didn't sleep again, she said. Didn't plan to. You can't chase a man forever without rest. Luke looked toward the empty road. I can try, Ada folded her arms. You're not the only one who lost something, Sheriff. That fire took half the pasture and nearly burned our home. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She studied him for a moment. Then let me help you finish this. You can't do it alone. Luke hesitated, then nodded once. All right. But this trail won't be kind. It hasn't been kind since the day I met you, she said. They rode out west, following faint tracks through the prairie. Hoofprints pressed deep in the damp soil leading toward the canyon country. The sky was pale and wide, the kind of emptiness that could swallow a man whole. As the day wore on, Luke said little. Ada could tell his thoughts were turning inward, chewing on guilt. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. He shook his head. A man like me doesn't get to start over. Maybe not, she said softly. But a man like you could stop punishing himself. He glanced at her, eyes shadowed. And what would I be without the punishment? She didn't answer. There was no easy reply for that. By noon they found what they were looking for, a burned-out camp near the river bend, ashes still warm, and one set of boot tracks leading toward the cliffs. Luke crouched beside them. He's close. Then let's end this, Ada said. They followed the tracks into the canyon. Wind howled through the narrow walls, carrying the echo of distant gunfire. Luke froze. Another shot cracked, closer this time. He drew his revolver and motioned for Ada to stay low. They crept forward until they saw movement ahead. Cole Ramsey, limping, rifle slung across his back. Cole, Luke's voice rang out, steady as steel. It's over. Cole turned, wild-eyed. You think I'm going back in chains? You can ride in or be carried in, Luke said. Your choice, Cole laughed bitterly. You still talk like the law means something, Luke. Look around you, it's just dust and ghosts. Ada stepped out beside Luke. Then stop running from both. Cole's gaze fixed on her. You should have stayed out of this, miss. Before Luke could move, Cole raised his rifle. The shot cracked through the canyon. Ada flinched, but Luke had already stepped in front of her. The bullet tore through his shoulder. He fell to one knee, gun still in his hand. Luke! Ada screamed, catching him before he hit the ground. Cole hesitated just a blink, but that was all it took. Luke fired once, his bullet striking true. Cole dropped his rifle and stumbled back, collapsing against the rock wall. The canyon fell silent except for the wind. Ada pressed her hands against Luke's wound, her eyes full of panic. You're bleeding badly, he grimaced. It's not the first time. Don't joke, she said, voice breaking. You'll die if we don't get you help. He looked past her at the clouds drifting overhead, breath shallow. Maybe that's what I earned. She shook her head fiercely. No, Sheriff. You earned peace. You just don't believe you deserve it yet. Her words hung between them, soft and fierce. Luke closed his eyes for a moment, then said quietly, Help me up. With effort she did. He leaned on her shoulder, the two of them standing against the canyon wind. Cole lay still a few yards away, eyes open to the sky, the fight gone from him at last. Luke stared at the fallen man, his voice hoarse. I told him once mercy would save him. I was wrong. Mercy only matters if a man accepts it. Ada turned to him, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Then you'd better start accepting yours. He met her eyes, and for the first time the wall between them cracked. Not from anger, but from understanding. They started the long walk back to Ridgeway, the sun setting behind them like a slow-burning fire. The road back to Ridgeway was long and quiet. Sheriff Luke's arm was bound with Ada's torn shawl, blood seeping through, dark and stubborn. He rode slouched in the saddle, jaw tight, eyes on the horizon. They reached town by dusk. The streets were nearly empty, shutters drawn against the cold. When people saw them ride in, Luke pale but upright, Ada steady beside him, they whispered. No one has asked questions yet. Ada helped him down outside the doctor's office. You'll rest here tonight, she said. I've got a jailhouse to tend, he murmured. Not tonight, Sheriff, she said firmly. The law can wait. Inside, the doctor worked in silence, stitching the wound with a steady hand. Luke barely flinched, but Ada saw his fingers dig into the edge of the table. When it was done, the doctor muttered, Lucky woman was there. Another inch and you'd be in the ground. Ada stayed through the night. The lamplight flickered over the sheriff's face, lined, weary, yet softer than before. He dozed fitfully, mumbling half-formed words about fire and guilt. At dawn, Ada stood at the window, watching snow fall over the silent town. Ridgeway seemed peaceful for once, though that peace felt fragile, like thin glass. Luke stirred behind her. He's dead, isn't he? Yes, she said quietly. Cole's gone. He let out a slow breath. I meant to bring him back alive. You did what you had to, she said. He didn't reply. After a moment, he asked, You still believe I was wrong to keep you from him? Ada turned, eyes calm but firm. I believe you were right to protect this town, but I also believe you forgot something. What's that? That justice without mercy is just another kind of revenge. Luke looked away, eyes on the snow. You sound like someone who still believes in good men. I believe people can change, she said softly. Even ones who think they can't. Later that morning, word spread that the sheriff had returned wounded but alive. Folks gathered outside the office, leaving bread and candles by the steps. They didn't say much, but the gesture spoke louder than words. Luke stood at the window watching them. Guess they still think I'm worth saving, he said. Ada smiled faintly. They don't just think it, Sheriff. They know it. Days passed. His arm healed slowly, though the pain never fully left. Ada visited often, sometimes bringing soup, sometimes silence. They'd sit together by the stove, warmth flickering between them like a fragile truce. One evening she asked, Will you ever forgive yourself for that fire? For him? Luke's gaze stayed fixed on the flames. I don't know how. Maybe forgiveness isn't something you find, she said. Maybe it's something you live. He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who'd walked into his guarded world and refused to leave it untouched. You make it sound simple. It's not, she said with a small smile. But it's worth it. Outside the snow thickened. The world felt quieter now, softened by the storm. Luke stood, walked to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. He stepped out into the white stillness, letting the snow fall over his hat and coat. Ada followed, standing beside him. For the first time in years, the town didn't feel heavy on his shoulders. It felt alive again. Ada looked up at the sheriff. You ever wonder why God lets some fires burn? Luke thought for a moment. Maybe to make room for new ground, he said. She nodded. Then maybe this is ours. He glanced at her, something quiet and uncertain flickering in his eyes. You really think a man like me deserves that kind of mercy? She smiled softly. I think that's what makes it mercy. The snow kept falling, covering the ashes of what had been, and for once Luke didn't turn away. Winter clung to Ridgeway long after Christmas had passed. The hills lay white and still, smoke rising from cabin chimneys in thin gray ribbons. Sheriff Luke Harlan, no longer wearing his badge, spent his mornings at the edge of town, hammering posts into frozen ground. Ada brought him coffee each day, steam rising from the tin cup between her hands. "You don't rest much for a man healing from a bullet," she teased. Luke smiled faintly. "Rest doesn't build fences. Neither does guilt," she said gently. He paused, looking at her over the top of the post. "You don't quit, do you?" "Not when something's worth saving." They worked in silence after that. The wind bit at their cheeks and the hammer's rhythm filled the air. Steady, purposeful. Luke had chosen to build a fence around the old pasture once used by outlaws. Said he wanted it for the town's horses, though Ada suspected it was really for something else. When he swung the last rail into place, he stood back, breathing hard. "There," he said. "Something straight in a world that never stays that way." That night they shared supper at the boarding house. Tom sat with them, still thin from jail but steadier now, his eyes clearer. He helped serve stew, his movements quiet and careful. "Doc says you'll be rid of that sling soon," Tom said to Luke. "Doc says a lot of things," Luke answered. "Some of them are true." Tom grinned a little. "You ain't so scary without the badge." Luke looked up, amused. "That's a lie if I ever heard one." Laughter, real, easy laughter, broke around the table. It felt strange to all of them, like music played after too long a silence. After supper, Ada walked Luke to the door. The night air carried the scent of wood smoke and snow. "He's changing," she said quietly. "So are you," he replied. "I don't know about that." He nodded toward her brother's room. "You used to look at him like you were waiting for him to break. Now you look at him like you believe he won't." Ada folded her arms. "And what about you, Sheriff? What do you believe in now?" He hesitated. "I used to think justice meant standing alone. Now I think maybe it means standing for someone else." They walked together to the edge of the porch. The stars stretched wide above them, cold and endless. Ada's shawl fluttered in the wind. "I never thanked you," she said after a moment. "For saving him." Luke shook his head. "Don't thank me for doing what's right." "I'm not," she said softly. "I'm thanking you for remembering that mercy matters too." He looked down, boots scuffing the porch floor. "Mercy," he repeated, like it was a word he hadn't said aloud in years. "Funny thing. You give it away and somehow it gives something back." They stood in silence for a while, the snow glowing faintly under the moonlight. Ada finally said, "You could stay, you know. The town still needs a man like you." "I'm no lawman anymore," he said. "Maybe not," she replied, "but you're still someone who keeps people safe. That's who you were before the badge and who you'll be after." He studied her face, searching for something he couldn't name. "And you, Miss Wynne? What'll you do when spring comes?" "Maybe start a school," she said. "Maybe just breathe for a while." Luke nodded slowly. "Reckon that's as fine a plan as any." The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of church bells from down the valley. Ada smiled at the sound. Luke tipped his hat. "Good night, Ada." "Good night, Sheriff," she said softly, though they both knew he wasn't one anymore. As he walked into the dark, his shadow stretched long across the snow. No badge, no burden, just a man learning how to live again. And for the first time, Ada didn't pray for her brother's freedom or for revenge or even for justice. She prayed for peace, something she'd only begun to understand. Spring came to Ridgeway slowly and quietly. The snow melted from the hills, revealing grass the color of new hope. The river thawed and sang again, and wild roses crept along the fences Luke had built through winter's cold. Ada stood one morning outside the boarding house, apron fluttering in the breeze. She watched her brother, Tom, drive nails into a new barn door. His hands were steady now, his face calm. Sometimes she still woke at night remembering the cell, the fear. But every sunrise pulled those memories a little further away. Down the road, Luke approached with a wagon full of fence posts. His hat was pulled low, coat unbuttoned for the first time in months. Ada met him halfway, brushing dust from her skirt. "You're still building," she said with a smile. "Town keeps finding new fences to mend," he replied. "Guess they think I'm good at it." They'd be right. He climbed down, handing her a small wooden box. "Found this near the ridge. Figured it belonged to you." Inside lay his badge, cleaned, polished, and set on a folded scrap of cloth. The same one she had found near the stagecoach wreck that started it all. Ada looked up, surprised. "You're giving it back?" He shook his head. "No, I'm giving it up. Figured it's better off buried than worn." "Buried?" she asked softly. He nodded toward the hill behind her. "By the fence line. Thought maybe you'd help." They walked together, the ground soft beneath their boots. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth. When they reached the end of the fence, Luke knelt and dug a small hole. He placed the badge inside, covering it with dirt until nothing shone but the sunlight on his hands. Ada stood beside him. "Seems strange," she murmured, "to bury something that once meant so much." "It meant order," he said quietly. "But it also meant walls I built too high. Maybe it's time to let them fall." They stood there a long moment. The sound of the river carried on the wind. Ada said, "You ever think of leaving? Starting over somewhere else?" Luke straightened, dusting his hands. "Used to. But I reckon I've already started over. Right here." She smiled faintly. "You sound almost at peace." "Almost," he said, a hint of humor in his voice. "Still got some ghosts to outwork. Don't we all?" They walked back toward town, passing neighbors mending fences and children chasing a stray chicken through the street. Life was ordinary again, but ordinary had never looked so good. That evening, Ada sat on the porch with her brother. Luke joined them, carrying 3 mugs of coffee. The sunset burned low across the valley, gold on the rooftops, soft on their faces. Tom leaned back in his chair. "Feels different now," he said. "Like the town finally forgave me." "Maybe it's not the town," Ada replied. "Maybe it's you forgiving yourself," Luke nodded. "That's the hardest kind." Silence settled between them, warm and easy. When the first stars appeared, Ada spoke again, her voice gentle. "You ever miss it? Being sheriff?" Luke looked at the horizon. "Some days. But most days I don't miss the badge. I miss believing the world was simple." Ada smiled. "Maybe simple isn't better. Maybe it's just quieter." He chuckled softly. "You always find a way to make trouble sound wise. Only when it's worth it." As the night deepened, the 3 of them sat together, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the river. The badge lay buried in the earth, its weight gone, its purpose fulfilled. And though no one said it aloud, they all felt the same thing. Some stories don't end with justice or mercy. They end when both learn to live side by side. The sheriff's heart, once hard as stone, had broken, and from its pieces, something gentler had begun to grow. The wind shifted through the grass, carrying the faint scent of wild roses. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Frontier Tales, where every week, the Wild West comes alive with stories of courage, mercy, and love that never quits. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next ride across the frontier.